When my sister claimed my house as hers, I let her move in and watched her fall apart. I never imagined that the person who slept in the room next to mine throughout our childhood would be capable of looking me in the eyes and trying to steal everything I had built. My name is Rebecca. I'm 34 years old, and for a long time, I believed family was sacred, that blood was something that united us beyond any disagreement or fleeting jealousy. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a modest two-bedroom house where my older sister, Jennifer, always had a special place in our parents' hearts. She was the perfect daughter, the one who got exemplary grades, participated in the church choir, and knew exactly what to say to make our mom smile and our dad proud. I was just the youngest, the quiet one, the one who preferred to spend hours reading alone in the yard under the old cherry tree my grandfather planted decades ago. Not that I was neglected or loved any less, but there was a subtle difference, a light that shone brighter when Jennifer entered the room, and I learned early on to content myself with the shadows. My parents worked hard, my dad as a hardware store manager and my mom as a nurse on the night shift, and all they wanted was to see us happy and safe. Jennifer married at 23 to a guy named Derek, who at the time seemed charming and ambitious, but over the years revealed himself to be just a mediocre man with too big dreams and too little discipline. They had two daughters, Olivia and Emma, and for a time, everything seemed to be going well for her. I, on the other hand, focused on my career. I graduated in business from the University of Oregon, got a job at a financial consulting firm in Seattle, and spent years climbing the ladder, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and even relationships to prove my worth in a male-dominated environment that thought I didn't belong there. I saved every penny I could, lived in tiny apartments, drove the same Honda Civic for 12 years, and never borrowed a single dollar from my parents. At 32, I finally realized my dream. I bought a house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. A 3-bedroom house in Bellevue, Washington, with a small front yard and a back porch where I could have coffee on Saturday mornings and feel that all that sacrifice had been worth it. My parents were immensely proud, and even Jennifer seemed happy for me when I went to Portland to tell the news in person during a Sunday lunch. She hugged me, said I deserved it, and for a brief moment, I felt like we were truly sisters, that the emotional distance that had always existed between us could finally shrink. But things began to change subtly in the following months. Jennifer started calling more often, always asking about the house, how much I had paid for it, the mortgage details, the market value of the property. At first, I thought it was just genuine curiosity, maybe even a little admiration. But soon, the questions became more persistent, almost invasive. She wanted to know how much I earned, how much I had saved, if I planned to sell it someday. I responded vaguely, trying to change the subject, but she always returned to the topic. It was during Thanksgiving that year that I realized something was seriously wrong. The whole family was gathered at my parents' house in Portland, as we did every year, and after dinner, Jennifer pulled me aside in the kitchen while we washed the dishes. She started talking about how Derek was struggling at work, how they were behind on rent, how the girls needed a more stable place to grow up. I was empathetic, offered some encouraging words, even suggested she consult a financial advisor I knew. But then she said something that froze me inside. She said she had been thinking a lot about the house, my house, and that it made sense for her and her family to move in, since I lived alone and there was so much space left unused. I laughed, thinking it was a bad joke, but she wasn't smiling. She looked at me with disturbing seriousness and said that the house should be hers by right, that our parents always helped me more than her, that I had had advantages she never had, and that it was only fair that I shared what I had with my own sister. I was so shocked that I didn't know what to say. My parents never gave me a cent more than they gave her. In fact, they had helped Jennifer financially numerous times over the years, paid for her wedding, helped with bills when Derek lost his job for the third time, bought clothes and school supplies for the girls. I had never asked for anything, never expected anything, and built everything on my own with my own sweat. But there she was, my older sister, telling me that I owed her something, that my achievement was somehow unfair. I tried to explain this to her calmly, said I understood she was going through a tough time, but that the house was mine, bought with my money, and I wasn't willing to just give it to her. Jennifer visibly got angry, her voice rising, and she started saying that I had always been selfish, that I never cared about the family, that I was turning into a cold and distant person because of my work and my money. My mom entered the kitchen at that moment and asked what was going on, and Jennifer immediately changed her posture, put a hurt expression on her face, and said she was just trying to have an honest conversation with me, but I didn't want to listen. I left that house that night with a knot in my stomach, feeling that something fundamental had broken between my sister and me, but I still had no idea how far she was willing to go. In the following weeks, Jennifer intensified her campaign. She started calling my mom almost every day, telling distorted stories about how I had refused to help the family, how I was arrogant and insensitive. My mom, who always had a soft spot for Jennifer, started calling me too, gently suggesting that maybe I could consider renting a room to my sister, just temporarily, until she got back on her feet financially. I explained repeatedly that it wasn't a matter of generosity, but of healthy boundaries and respect for what I had achieved. But the pressure kept building, and I could feel my mom pulling away from me emotionally, as if I were disappointing the family for not giving in to Jennifer's wishes. Then, one cold January afternoon, I received a call from a lawyer named Thomas Brennan. He introduced himself politely and said he was calling on behalf of Jennifer Patterson, my sister, to discuss a matter related to the property in Bellevue. My heart raced. I asked what he was talking about, and he explained, with a disturbing formality, that Jennifer had filed a legal action claiming she had rights to the house based on a supposed verbal agreement made years ago with our parents, in which they had promised that any property acquired by any of the children would be considered shared family property. It was absurd, it was a lie, and it was so outrageous that I almost hung up the phone. But the lawyer continued, saying that Jennifer had witnesses willing to corroborate her version, and that he strongly advised me to seek my own legal representation to resolve the matter before things got more complicated. I hung up the phone, trembling with rage and disbelief. My own sister was suing me, inventing lies, manipulating people to try and take my house. I spent the following days in a state of shock, oscillating between anger, sadness, and a deep confusion about how things had come to this point. I called my parents immediately after talking to the lawyer, and the conversation was devastating. My dad answered, and when I told him about the lawsuit, he was silent for a long moment before saying he knew nothing about this, that he had never made any agreement about shared property, and that Jennifer was completely out of control. But then my mom picked up the phone, and her reaction was different. She didn't openly defend Jennifer, but she didn't give me the support I desperately needed either. She said that family shouldn't solve problems in court, that I should be the more mature one and find a way to help my sister without creating all this drama, and that maybe if I had been more generous from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Those words cut me deeply. I was being unjustly sued, being defamed and manipulated, and my own mom was suggesting that it was my fault. I hung up the phone with tears streaming down my face, feeling a loneliness I hadn't felt since childhood. I hired a lawyer named Rachel Morrison, an incredibly competent and direct woman who, after reviewing all the documentation, assured me that Jennifer's case had no legal grounds, There was no contract, no written agreement, nothing but empty words and witnesses who were probably being manipulated. Rachel told me that the case would be dismissed quickly, but that the process could be emotionally exhausting and that I should be prepared for Jennifer to escalate things even further before she gave up. And she was right. In the following weeks, Jennifer started a defamation campaign on social media, posting vague messages but clearly directed at me, talking about selfish sisters who forget their roots, about people who change when they have a little money, about the importance of taking care of family. Friends in common started texting me asking what was going on, and I found myself having to repeatedly explain my side of the story, defending myself from accusations that should never have existed. It was exhausting, humiliating, and deeply painful. But then something unexpected happened. During one of the preliminary hearings, sitting in that cold courtroom in Seattle, watching Jennifer on the other side of the room with her cheap lawyer and her expression of fake vulnerability, an idea began to form in my mind. Rachel was confident we would win the case, but I started thinking beyond legal victory. Jennifer wanted my house? Did she really believe she deserved to live there? Maybe I should give her exactly what she was asking for, but not in the way she expected. The idea was risky, possibly crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I didn't just want to win the lawsuit and move on. I wanted Jennifer to understand deeply and irreversibly how wrong she was, how destructive her envy and manipulation had been, and how much she had underestimated who I really was. So I began to devise a plan. The first thing I did was talk to Rachel about the possibility of a settlement. She was initially confused, since we had all the cards in hand to win easily. But I explained my intention vaguely, just saying I wanted to avoid more stress for the family and that I had an idea that could solve everything once and for all. Rachel was experienced enough not to ask too many questions, but she warned me to be careful and ensure that any agreement was properly documented to protect me legally. I agreed and asked her to contact Jennifer's lawyer with a proposal. I would allow Jennifer and her family to live in my house for a period of 6 months, rent-free, while she got her finances in order. In exchange, Jennifer would withdraw the lawsuit, sign a document acknowledging that the house was exclusively my property, and agree to leave peacefully at the end of the stipulated period. When Rachel presented the proposal, Jennifer's lawyer immediately accepted, probably relieved not to have to continue with that ridiculous case. Jennifer, I learned later, was ecstatic. She called my mom saying that I had finally seen the light, that I was doing the right thing, and that she always knew I had a good heart deep down. My mom called me that night, her voice full of relief and gratitude, saying she was proud of me for putting family first and that it showed my true character. I didn't say anything beyond a brief, "You're welcome," and hung up the phone with a bitter smile on my lips. They had no idea what was coming. Before Jennifer moved in, I spent 2 weeks meticulously preparing the house. I removed all my personal belongings, all my photos, my favorite books, anything of sentimental or financial value. I stored everything in a safe deposit I rented specifically for that. I left only the basic furniture and some meaningless decorative items. But what I really did, and what no one but me and a specialist technician I hired knew, was install a system of discrete security cameras in every room of the house. It wasn't to spy in an invasive or illegal way, but to document what I suspected would happen. All the cameras were legal, visible to anyone who really looked for them, and I had complete documentation proving the house was still my property and that I had every right to monitor it. When Jennifer finally arrived with Derek and the girls on a sunny March morning, I was there to welcome them. I handed over the keys with a smile I hope looked genuine, wished them good luck, and left without looking back. Jennifer hugged me before I left, whispering a "thank you, little sister," that sent a chill of disgust down my spine. I temporarily moved to a rented apartment across town, a small but comfortable place, and began to wait. I didn't have to wait long. In the following months, my life became a strange mixture of liberation and torment. On one hand, I was physically away from Jennifer and all the drama she brought with her, living my life in the rented apartment, focusing on my work and trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. On the other hand, I was constantly aware of what was happening in my house, checking the security footage regularly, documenting each new violation of the agreement we had made. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing that the final impact was approaching, but still not having reached it. During this period, I kept a meticulous record of everything. Every utility bill that arrived in my name and that Jennifer should have been paying but wasn't, every damage to the property, every unauthorized person who entered the house, every noisy party that resulted in complaints from the neighbors that my lawyer, Rachel, carefully documented. My bank account was suffering from the costs of maintaining the house while also paying for the temporary apartment, but I saw it as a necessary investment. I was building such a solid, irrefutable case that when the time came to act, no one, not even my mom, with all her tendency to protect Jennifer, would be able to argue that I was being unfair. Jennifer's behavior worsened progressively. Through the cameras, I saw how she began to treat the house with even less respect as the months passed. The garden I had cared for so lovingly was completely neglected, the plants dying from lack of water, the lawn growing wildly out of control. Inside the house, the situation was even worse. The kitchen was constantly dirty, with piles of dishes accumulating in the sink, food scraps left on the counters for days. The living room carpet now had several stains that I knew would be impossible to remove. And there was a hole in the drywall in the hallway where someone had apparently punched or kicked the wall during a fight, which the cameras caught between Jennifer and Derek. Derek, I noticed through the footage, was even more of a problem than I had imagined. He spent most of his days lying on the couch watching TV, rarely went out to look for a job, and I saw him on multiple occasions being rude and even verbally aggressive with Jennifer in front of the girls. There were moments when I felt a pang of pity, thinking that maybe Jennifer was stuck in a toxic relationship and that her envy and destructive behavior were a twisted way of asking for help. But then I remembered how she had tried to sue me, how she had lied and manipulated, and my sympathy evaporated quickly. In the fourth month, something happened that accelerated my plans. One of the neighbors, an elderly lady named Margaret, who had always been kind to me, called me worried. She had seen a moving truck in front of the house and people carrying furniture and boxes inside. When she politely asked Jennifer what was happening, Jennifer replied that she was just bringing a few personal things and that Margaret didn't need to worry about it. But Margaret, being the observant person she was, noticed that it wasn't just personal belongings, it was large, expensive furniture, and she suspected Jennifer was bringing more people to live in the house. I thanked Margaret for the information and immediately checked the footage from that day. And there it was, clear as day, Jennifer not only bringing in her own additional furniture, but also accommodating Derek's brother, a man named Kyle who I had briefly met years ago and who struck me as deeply unpleasant, a guy who always had some shady scheme going on. Kyle was now living in the third bedroom of my house, the room I had planned to eventually turn into a home office, and through the cameras, I could see that he wasn't contributing anything to the expenses. He was just occupying space and adding even more chaos to an already unsustainable situation. That was the last straw. Jennifer wasn't just abusing my generosity and violating our agreement, she was actively bringing other people to occupy my property without my permission. It was time to act, but I had to do it the right way, with perfect timing. I spoke with Rachel, and she agreed that we had more than enough evidence to not only evict Jennifer, but potentially seek financial compensation for the damages and violations of the contract. We decided to wait until the end of the 6-month period established in the original agreement so that there would be no legal ambiguity about the terms, and then we would initiate the formal eviction process. In the meantime, Rachel began preparing all the necessary documentation, organizing the video footage in chronological order, compiling all the complaints from the neighbors, calculating the total cost of the damage to the property based on assessments from professionals we had discreetly hired. It was meticulous work, but necessary. During this period, my relationship with my mom hit its lowest point. She occasionally called, always asking how I was, but there was a coldness in her voice that hurt me deeply.
In one of those conversations, she casually mentioned how wonderful it was that Jennifer finally had a decent place to raise the girls, how the children were happy in their new school in Bellevue, and how Derek was about to get a great job at a tech company, something I knew through my observations was a complete lie. I bit my tongue, didn't reveal anything I knew, and just superficially agreed with what she said. My dad, on the other hand, called me a few times alone without my mom knowing. He was never much for words, but in one of those conversations, he said something that stayed with me. He said he knew I was doing what he thought was right, that he trusted my judgment, and that no matter what, he loved me and was on my side. He didn't explicitly say he knew Jennifer was behaving badly or that I had a plan, but there was an unspoken understanding in his words, a silent validation that I desperately needed. I cried after that call, not from sadness, but from relief, knowing that at least one of my parents still saw me for who I truly was. As the 6th month approached, I could feel the tension building. Jennifer, I assumed, was becoming more and more comfortable, more secure in her position, more convinced that she had won our dispute and that I was too weak to do anything about it. She posted pictures on social media of the house, always with angles that hid the dirt and chaos, with captions about new beginnings and unexpected blessings, always without tagging or mentioning me, as if I had nothing to do with it. Her friends commented with congratulations and heart emojis, and I wondered how many of them really knew the truth about how she got that house. Probably none. Jennifer was always excellent at controlling narratives, presenting herself as either the victim or the hero, depending on what best served her purposes at the moment. Finally, the last day of the 6-month period arrived. It was a Tuesday, and according to our contract, Jennifer was supposed to vacate the property by 6 p.m. that day. Rachel had already sent multiple formal notices in the previous weeks, reminding Jennifer of the terms of the agreement and requesting confirmation that she would be leaving the property as stipulated. Jennifer responded to only one of those notices, through her lawyer, with a vague message saying she was working on the details of the move and needed more time. Rachel professionally responded that no extension would be granted and that any occupation beyond the agreed date would be considered illegal trespassing. At 6:15 p.m. on that Tuesday, when it became clear that Jennifer had no intention of leaving, Rachel initiated the emergency eviction process that had already been prepared and filed, just waiting to be formalized. At the same time, I drove to the house for the first time in months, accompanied by Rachel and a court officer she had arranged to accompany us. My heart was pounding as I parked on the street and saw my house, which seemed visibly more worn than when Jennifer had moved in. When I rang the doorbell of my own house, there was a long silence before the door opened. Jennifer appeared, dressed in casual clothes, with a look of confusion that quickly turned to irritation when she saw who was standing in front of her. Behind her, I could hear the TV at full volume and the voices of Derek and Kyle talking about something. Jennifer crossed her arms and stared at me with raw hostility, which made me instinctively take a step back. But Rachel immediately positioned herself next to me, holding a thick folder of documents, and the court officer, a tall, serious man named Officer Hamilton, stood slightly behind us, his intimidating presence enough to make Jennifer hesitate. I took a deep breath and said with a voice I forced to sound calm and professional that the temporary occupancy period had ended and that she needed to vacate the property immediately. Jennifer let out a bitter laugh and said I was crazy, that she wasn't going anywhere, that 6 months wasn't enough time for her to find another house, and that I should have more compassion for my own family. I didn't respond, just nodded to Rachel, who calmly handed Jennifer a copy of the original agreement she had signed, highlighting the specific clause about the vacating date, along with all the formal notices that had been sent in the past weeks. Jennifer barely glanced at the papers before throwing them on the floor and saying that they meant nothing, that she had rights as an occupant, that Derek had spoken to a lawyer who said they could stay for at least another 90 days while they contested the eviction. It was at that moment that Rachel intervened, her voice cold and professional, cutting through Jennifer's anger like a sharp blade. She explained that Jennifer had no occupancy rights because the agreement was temporary and specific, that any decent lawyer would have told her exactly that, and that the presence of Kyle, an unauthorized person living in the property, was an additional violation of the contract that could result in even more severe legal consequences. Jennifer paled slightly when Kyle was mentioned, and Derek appeared behind her at that moment asking what was going on in a slurred voice that suggested he had been drinking. Officer Hamilton stepped forward and explained that he was there to oversee the enforcement of an eviction order, and that Jennifer and all the occupants of the house had until midnight that night to remove their belongings and leave the property, or he would return with reinforcements to physically remove them. Derek's expression quickly changed from confusion to anger, and he started shouting that this was ridiculous, that they weren't going anywhere, that I couldn't just show up and kick them out like this. But Officer Hamilton, with the calm authority of someone who dealt with this type of situation regularly, said that yes, I could, because it was my property, because the agreement had expired, and because they were now technically trespassing on private property. He strongly suggested that they start packing immediately to avoid any more unpleasant situations. Jennifer looked at me then with a mixture of hatred and desperation that made me feel simultaneously victorious and deeply sad. She said, her voice trembling, that I was ruining her life, that her daughters would have nowhere to go, that I was a horrible, heartless person who chose a house over her own family. And for the first time since all this had begun, I responded with all the truth I had been holding back. I told her that I hadn't chosen a house over family. I had chosen to protect myself from someone who tried to steal from me, manipulate me, and defame me. That she had had 6 months of rent-free living in a property she hadn't earned, and instead of using that time to actually get her life together, she had treated my house like trash, brought unauthorized people to live there, and on top of that had planned to try to trick me once again by illegally extending her stay. Then Rachel opened the folder she was holding and began to show Jennifer something I knew would destroy her. It was printed footage from the security cameras. Images clearly showing the damage to the property, the unauthorized parties, Kyle moving in, and one particularly devastating clip showing Jennifer laughing with her friends while saying I was too stupid to realize she never intended to leave. Jennifer turned pale as a ghost when she saw those images. She stammered something about privacy, about how those cameras were illegal, but Rachel immediately cut her off, explaining that the cameras were completely legal, that they were visible to anyone who really looked for them, that the house was my property, and that Jennifer had been informed in the contract that the property was equipped with a security system. Jennifer had clearly not read the contract carefully because she never thought I would be smart or ruthless enough to protect myself properly. Derek tried to argue, but his voice was faltering, and Kyle simply disappeared into the house, probably realizing that his presence there could bring even more problems for him. Then Rachel played the final card. She informed Jennifer that in addition to the eviction, I was filing a civil lawsuit for property damage, that the repair and restoration costs were estimated at around $28,000 based on professional evaluations, and that Jennifer would be responsible for this amount, in addition to the unpaid utility bills, which totaled approximately $3,200. Jennifer literally staggered, leaning on the doorframe, and for the first time since all this had started, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She whispered that she didn't have that money, that she had no way to pay it, and Rachel responded coldly that she should then start considering her options, which included payment agreements, asset liens, or potentially bankruptcy. Reality was finally hitting Jennifer with full force, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that she had lost, that her schemes and manipulations had backfired in a way she never anticipated. She tried one last emotional shot, looking at me with tears in her eyes and saying that we were sisters, that she had made mistakes but family should forgive, that she was desperate and I couldn't do this to her. And I, with a calmness that surprised even me, said that she was absolutely right about one thing. Family should forgive. But forgiveness didn't mean allowing someone to keep hurting me. It didn't mean being a passive victim of manipulation and abuse. And it didn't mean sacrificing my own well-being and security to accommodate someone else's destructive behavior. I told her she had until midnight to leave, and that if she respected that deadline and handed over the keys peacefully, I would consider reducing the amount I was seeking in the civil lawsuit to cover only the actual repair costs without any additional punitive damages. Jennifer didn't say anything else. She simply slammed the door in my face, and through the door, I could hear the sound of an angry argument between her and Derek, followed by the sound of things being thrown and moved quickly. Officer Hamilton said he would return at 11:30 to ensure the property was being vacated, and that if there were any problems, he would bring additional support. Rachel and I returned to her car, and as we drove to a nearby cafe to wait for the next few hours to pass, I finally allowed a few tears to fall. They weren't tears of regret or guilt, but tears of relief, of release from months of tension and planning, of sadness for the family I had lost in the process, but also of a strange sense of empowerment. I had defended myself in a way I never imagined I was capable of.
What I found inside the house was worse than the cameras had shown. The footage captured a lot, but it didn't capture the smell of mildew and accumulated dirt. It didn't capture the sticky feeling of floors that clearly hadn't been cleaned in weeks. It didn't capture the full extent of the damage that only became apparent when you were physically present. I walked slowly from room to room, documenting everything with my phone, taking additional photos and videos that would be useful for the civil lawsuit. The kitchen was in deplorable condition, with food remnants hardened on the stove, the oven covered in burned splashes, the refrigerator with a nauseating smell that made me step back when I opened it. Jennifer had left spoiled food inside, along with dirty dishes and leftover packaging. The main bathroom had a cracked glass shower, probably the result of some accident she never bothered to report or fix, and there was mold growing in the joints of the tiles. In the room that had been occupied by Kyle, there were additional holes in the walls, cigarette burn marks on the carpet, despite the explicit no smoking rule inside the house, and a broken window that had been covered with cardboard and duct tape. The living room, which I remembered as a cozy and bright space, was almost unrecognizable. The wall Jennifer had painted bright pink was now also marked with scratches and stains. The furniture I had left behind was damaged beyond repair, and there was a large, dark stain on the carpet that I couldn't identify, but which emitted a terrible smell. I sat down on the floor in that destroyed room, unable to continue for a moment, and let the reality of that destruction hit me fully. This wasn't just a damaged house. It was a physical manifestation of all the disrespect, all the envy, all the cruelty Jennifer had felt toward me. She hadn't just neglected my property out of carelessness, she had actively allowed, and perhaps even encouraged, its destruction as a distorted form of revenge for not simply giving everything to her without question. I spent the entire night in the house, unable to truly sleep, just sitting in different rooms, processing everything that had happened in the past months. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel all the pain, all the anger, all the sadness of having lost my sister. Not to death or distance, but to greed and manipulation. A part of me still loved the Jennifer I knew when we were kids, the older sister who sometimes defended me on the playground, who taught me to ride a bike, who shared her candy with me when no one was looking. But this Jennifer, if she ever really existed, had been dead a long time, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and who I no longer wanted in my life. In the following days, I began the long process of restoration. I hired a professional cleaning team that took 3 full days to bring the house back to a minimally hygienic state. Then came the repairmen, assessing each damage, giving quotes that made me swallow hard, even knowing I would seek legal compensation. The carpet had to be completely removed and replaced, the walls needed to be repaired and repainted, the shower had to be replaced, the broken window repaired, and a series of small fixes that individually seemed minor, but collectively added up to a significant amount of time and money. Rachel kept in regular contact, updating me on the progress of the civil lawsuit. Jennifer's lawyer initially tried to argue that the damages were exaggerated, that some wear and tear was normal for an occupied property, but the photographic and video evidence was irrefutable. Eventually, after weeks of negotiations, we reached an agreement where Jennifer would agree to pay $17,000 in monthly installments over the next 5 years. It wasn't the full amount of the damages, but Rachel advised me that it was more realistic than trying to extract a larger sum from someone who clearly didn't have substantial financial resources. I agreed, not because I desperately needed the money, but because the formal agreement represented a legal acknowledgement that Jennifer was wrong, that she had to face the consequences of her actions. During all this time, my mom called me only once. It was a brief and painful conversation where she accused me of being cruel to Jennifer, of having set a trap for her, of using my resources and education to humiliate and financially destroy my own sister.
I tried to explain everything that had happened, all the violations of the agreement, all the damages, all the lies, but she didn't want to listen. She said that true family found ways to forgive and move forward, and that I had chosen the path of revenge instead of the path of love. Those words hurt me more deeply than anything Jennifer had done. I told my mom, with a voice that trembled despite my efforts to keep it steady, that I didn't choose revenge. I chose justice, and that there was a fundamental difference between those two things. That revenge would have been using my position to destroy Jennifer completely, to ensure she lost everything and had no chance of recovery. But justice was simply ensuring that she took responsibility for what she had done and learned that actions have consequences. My mom hung up without saying anything else, and we didn't speak again for months. My dad, true to his quiet and observant nature, visited me personally a few weeks later. He showed up at the house on a Saturday afternoon without notice, and I opened the door to find him standing there with an expression that mixed sadness and pride. We didn't talk much initially. He simply walked through the house with me, observing all the repairs that were being made, asking practical questions about costs and timelines. But when we sat on the back porch with coffee, he finally said what he had come to say. He said he was sorry for everything I had gone through, that he understood why I did what I did, and that although he loved Jennifer as his daughter, he wasn't blind to her flaws and her destructive choices. He said that my mom was having trouble accepting reality because admitting that Jennifer was wrong meant admitting that she, as a mother, might have failed to teach some important lessons about responsibility and respect. But he wanted me to know that he saw me, that he understood, and that he was proud of how I stayed strong and defended myself. I cried in my dad's arms that afternoon, tears of pain, but also of gratitude for at least having one member of my family who still saw me for who I really was. He told me before he left that family was complicated, that love sometimes meant setting tough boundaries, and that I shouldn't carry guilt for doing what was necessary to protect myself. Those words gave me a strength I didn't know I needed. Slowly, very slowly, the house returned to normal. The repairs were completed, new furniture was bought to replace the ones that had been destroyed, and I finally moved back in. But the house didn't feel the same anymore. There was something different about it now, an energy that had been tainted by Jennifer's presence and by everything that had happened. I seriously considered selling it and starting fresh somewhere else, but Rachel advised me to wait, to give time for the bad memories to be replaced by new positive experiences. And she was right. Over time, as months turned into a year, the house slowly started to feel like mine again. We redecorated completely, changing everything that could remind me of that dark period, and I started building new memories there, inviting friends over for dinners, hosting small gatherings, turning that space back into a home instead of a battlefield. You know, reaching this point in the story, I need to pause again and speak directly to you who are following me this far. I know this journey has been intense, full of difficult moments and decisions that many would question, and I understand that. I truly do. There were nights when I questioned myself if I made the right choices, if I could have resolved things differently. But what I've learned through all of this is that sometimes in life, we're forced to choose between being loved and being respected, between keeping the peace and keeping our integrity. And I chose respect. I chose integrity, even knowing it would cost me relationships I valued. If you're going through something similar, if there's someone in your life who is manipulating you, using you, making you doubt your own worth, I want you to know that it's okay to defend yourself. It's okay to say no, to set boundaries, to protect what you've built with your own effort. You're not selfish for doing that, you're human, and you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. If this story resonates with you, if you have your own experiences you'd like to share, I would love to hear them here in the comments. No judgment, just real stories of real people navigating the complexities of family relationships. And if you want to keep following this journey with me to see how it all ended and what I learned from the process, I would be honored to have you here because the story isn't over yet and the most important lessons are still to come. So let's continue together.
The months that followed brought a strange peace to my life. I returned to my routine at work, focusing on projects that had been neglected during all the chaotic time, and slowly rebuilt my social life that had suffered due to my emotional isolation. Friends who had noticed my distance gradually became part of my daily life again, And although I didn't share all the details of what had happened with Jennifer, I shared enough so they understood that I had been through something difficult and was recovering. There was one particular moment, about 8 months after the eviction, when a colleague named Amanda invited me to a dinner at her house. It was a small, casual gathering, nothing elaborate, but there was something deeply comforting about being in a normal family environment, where people laughed easily, where there was no underlying tension or hidden agendas, where family meant support and not manipulation. Watching Amanda interact with her husband and 2 teenage kids, joking around with each other in a light and affectionate way, I felt a pang of sadness for everything I had lost, but also a new clarity about what family should really be. During this time, Jennifer was keeping up with her monthly payments according to the legal agreement. I received automatic notifications each time a payment was processed, and there was something symbolically powerful in those monthly alerts, concrete reminders that actions had consequences, and that I had successfully defended myself. But the money itself was never really the main point for me. What I was truly seeking was something more intangible, some sort of recognition or understanding that Jennifer had grasped the gravity of what she had done. And then, completely unexpectedly, that happened. It was on a cold November afternoon, almost a year and a half after the eviction, when I received a text message from a number I didn't immediately recognize. The message simply said, "It's Jennifer. Can we talk?" My first instinct was to delete the message and block the number. I didn't want to reopen wounds that were still healing, didn't want to expose myself again to manipulation and drama. But something made me hesitate, perhaps a morbid curiosity or maybe a naive hope that Jennifer had really changed. I cautiously responded, asking what she wanted to discuss, and she suggested we meet for coffee in neutral territory, just the 2 of us. I took days to decide if I would accept, consulted Rachel, who warned me to be cautious, but said the choice was mine, and I finally agreed to meet her at a busy Starbucks near downtown Seattle, a public place where I would feel safe and where there would be no room for dramatic confrontations. When I arrived on the appointed day, Jennifer was already there, sitting at a table near the window, holding a cup of coffee with both hands as if she needed the warmth to stay grounded. She looked different, older in a way that wasn't just about the passage of time, but something deeper, as if she had carried too much weight for too long. I sat across from her without saying anything, waiting for her to initiate the conversation since she was the one who had requested the meeting. Jennifer stayed silent for a long moment, just looking at the coffee in her hands, and then she started speaking with a quiet voice I barely recognized. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her, that she wasn't there to ask for forgiveness because she understood she had gone too far to deserve that. But she wanted me to know that the past few months had been the hardest of her life, not just because of financial difficulties or having to find a place to live with 2 kids and a husband who continued to be useless, but because of what she had been forced to confront about herself. She said that after the eviction, they had moved into a small, cheap apartment in Tacoma, that Derek had finally managed to get a stable job after she gave him an ultimatum that if he didn't contribute, she would file for divorce. She said she had started therapy, initially at the insistence of a social worker at the girls' school, who had noticed Olivia was having behavioral problems related to the family instability. And it was through these therapy sessions that Jennifer began to recognize patterns in her behavior that she had been denying for years. Patterns of envy, victimization, always thinking the world owed her something without her having to work for it. The therapist had asked her in one of the sessions why she thought she deserved my house, and Jennifer had initially given all the answers I expected, about family, about need, about how I had more than I needed. But the therapist didn't accept those superficial answers, kept pressing her, making Jennifer examine where this belief that she was entitled to what was mine came from. And eventually, through a lot of painful work, Jennifer began to recognize that much of it stemmed from a deep envy that existed since childhood, a sense that despite being the older child, the one who followed the rules, the one who did everything right, I somehow had something she never managed to achieve. And instead of doing the necessary work to find her own version of fulfillment, she simply tried to take mine. Hearing Jennifer say these things was surreal. For so long, I had imagined confrontations where she would try to justify herself or manipulate me again. But this was different. There was a raw honesty in her words that seemed genuine, a willingness to take responsibility that I'd never seen in her before. She said she understood now why I did what I did, that looking back, I had actually been more generous than she deserved by allowing her to stay in the house for 6 months instead of just refusing her from the start. She said that what embarrassed her the most wasn't the eviction or the legal consequences, but the video recordings, knowing there was permanent evidence of how she had treated my property, how she had talked about me to other people, how she had revealed the worst of herself thinking no one was watching. That had forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding, that the problem wasn't me or our parents or Derek or anyone she used to blame. The problem was her own choices. I asked Jennifer why she was telling me all of this, what she really wanted from the meeting, and she said something that surprised me. She said she didn't want anything, wasn't expecting reconciliation or a renewed relationship, wasn't asking me to stop the payments or reduce the amount she owed. She was there because her therapist had suggested that part of taking responsibility was directly recognizing to the people she had hurt the impact of her actions, without expecting forgiveness or absolution. And I was the person she had hurt most deeply, so she needed to do this, not for herself, but because it was the right thing to do. We sat in that cafe for more than 2 hours, talking in a way we hadn't in years, maybe since before she married Derek. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. We didn't suddenly become close sisters again, but it was the beginning of something. A possibility that maybe one day, with a lot of work and time, we could have some kind of relationship that wasn't completely poisoned by everything that had happened. I didn't trust her completely, not immediately, because trust has to be rebuilt slowly through consistent actions, not just words. But I recognized the effort. I recognized that she was at least trying to do better, and that meant something. When we said goodbye that afternoon, Jennifer hugged me briefly, and I allowed it, though my body instinctively tense. She said she would continue making the payments as agreed, that she wasn't expecting me to make it easy on her, because she understood that she had to face the full consequences of her actions. And then she left, and I stayed there for a few more minutes, processing that entire conversation, feeling a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully organize. I drove back home slowly, allowing myself to feel everything, not trying to force any conclusion or immediate resolution. When I arrived, I called my dad and told him about the meeting. He listened in silence, and when I finished, he said he was proud of both me for giving Jennifer the chance to speak and of Jennifer for finally starting to do the hard work of changing. He said my mom was still struggling to accept the whole situation, but he believed that with time, maybe she would also see things more clearly. The months that followed that unexpected meeting, my life continued moving forward, but now with a different sense of closure. Jennifer kept her word about the payments, and beyond that, she began sending me occasional messages, never invasive or demanding a response, just small updates about how she was progressing in therapy, how the girls were adjusting better to school, how she had gotten a part-time job at a veterinary clinic that she was genuinely enjoying. I replied briefly, keeping a respectful but not hostile distance, allowing that new dynamic to develop organically without forcing anything. It was strange, after all we had been through, to have this civilized communication, but there was also something healing in it, a proof that people really can change if they are willing to do the difficult work necessary.
About 6 months after that coffee meeting, I received a call from my mom. It was the first time we had properly talked since that painful argument months before, and I answered the phone with my heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. My mom started the conversation hesitantly, her voice full of emotion that she was clearly trying to control. She said she had talked at length with Jennifer, that she had seen the changes my sister was making, and that my dad had finally managed to make her understand that she had been unfair to me, that she had taken sides without truly considering the entire situation. She didn't directly apologize because my mom was never good with vulnerable words like that, but she said she had thought a lot about everything and wanted me to know that she loved me and that she was proud of me. She said it had been difficult for her to accept that Jennifer had acted so badly because, in a way, it reflected on how she had raised her daughters, but she was starting to understand that adults make their own choices and that Jennifer was responsible for her actions. That conversation with my mom didn't erase all the pain that her previous words had caused, but it opened a door that I had thought was permanently closed. We began talking more regularly after that, not avoiding the subject of what had happened, but also not allowing it to completely define our relationship. It was a delicate balance, but we were both trying, and that was what mattered. Christmas that year was particularly meaningful. For the first time in almost 2 years, the entire family gathered at my parents' house in Portland. There was a palpable tension in the air when I arrived and saw Jennifer already there with Derek and the girls, but it was a different kind of tension than the hostility that had dominated our previous meetings. It was more of an uncertain nervousness, all of us carefully navigating unfamiliar territory, trying to figure out how to be a family again after everything that had happened. Olivia and Emma, now older and more aware of the family dynamics, greeted me with a shyness that broke my heart. And I made sure to spend time with them throughout the day, making it clear that whatever issues existed between me and their parents, they had no part in it, and that I still loved them as my nieces. Jennifer and I kept a polite distance for most of the day, but there was one moment, late at night after the girls had gone to bed, when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen while we prepared coffee. We were silent for a moment, and then Jennifer quietly said that she was glad I had come, that she knew it wasn't easy for me to be there, and that it meant a lot that I had given the family that chance. I told her that family was complicated, that there was still pain and a lot of work to be done, but that I was willing to try if she was. She nodded with tears in her eyes, and we finished making the coffee in a silence that was less uncomfortable than it was thoughtful. That night, driving back to Bellevue through the dark, cold roads of Oregon, I thought a lot about the journey I had been through. It had started with a personal achievement, buying my house, something that should have been a moment of pure joy and pride. It had been transformed into a brutal battle that tested my strength, my resilience, and my willingness to defend myself, even if it meant confronting the people I loved. And now it was coming to a place of tentative resolution, not perfect, not without scars, but real and honest. I had learned things about myself through all of this that I probably would never have learned otherwise. I had discovered that I was stronger than I thought, more capable of strategic planning and disciplined execution than I imagined. But I also learned about the costs of that strength, about how defending yourself sometimes meant temporarily breaking away from family, about how it meant being seen as the bad guy by people who didn't understand the full story, about how it meant carrying the weight of difficult decisions that no one else could make for you. Today, more than 2 years after everything started, my life is in a very different place than it was when I bought that house in Bellevue. The house itself is still mine, completely restored, and once again, a space that brings me joy rather than pain. Jennifer has made about half of the agreed payments and has been consistent with them, proving through actions and not just words that she is committed to taking responsibility. Our relationship is cordial, sometimes even warm, but there is an unspoken understanding that we will never again be as close as some sisters are. And strangely, I'm at peace with that. Some relationships are better kept at a healthy distance, where there is mutual respect, but also clear boundaries that protect both parties. My relationship with my parents has recovered significantly, especially with my dad, who has always been my quiet support, but also with my mom, who has finally managed to see beyond her need to protect Jennifer and recognize that I, too, needed protection, validation, to be seen and heard. Derek strangely ended up being a positive factor in the end. The near loss of his family when Jennifer threatened divorce seems to have finally motivated him to become a more present and responsible partner and father. And although I still have my reservations about him, I recognize that he is making a genuine effort. The girls, Olivia and Emma, are thriving, according to Jennifer, more stable now that their home life has some consistency. And I hope that as they grow older, we can develop an aunt-niece relationship that isn't tainted by their parents' mistakes. As for me, I've learned to value relationships that are built on honesty and mutual respect rather than simply on family obligation or social expectation. My circle is smaller now, more carefully curated, composed of people who demonstrate through consistent actions that they value me and respect my boundaries. I no longer fear saying no. I no longer carry guilt for prioritizing my own well-being, and I don't apologize for building a life that I love through my own hard work and sacrifice. There are moments, especially on quiet nights when I'm alone in that house that was the epicenter of so much drama, that I wonder if I could have done things differently, if there was a path that could have avoided so much suffering for everyone involved. But honestly, looking back with all the wisdom that only comes through lived experience, I don't think there was. Jennifer needed to face real consequences in order to truly change, and I needed to defend myself in a strong, unequivocal way to establish the kind of boundaries that would allow any future healthy relationship. If I had given in, if I had just given her what she wanted out of fear of conflict or some distorted sense of family obligation, she would never have been forced to do the internal work necessary, and I would have become a perpetual victim in our dynamic. Always giving, always being used, always resentful, but never able to change the pattern. What I did was hard, it was painful, and there were real costs. But it was also necessary, it was just, and it ultimately resulted in something that feels like growth and healing, even if imperfect. One of the most important lessons I've learned through all of this is that forgiveness and trust are different things. I can forgive Jennifer for the mistakes she made. I can recognize that she was dealing with her own pain and insecurities in destructive ways. I can have compassion for the person she was at that moment. But that doesn't mean I have to trust her blindly. That doesn't mean I have to open my life completely to her again. And it certainly doesn't mean I have to forget what happened. Forgiveness is something I give to myself as much as to her. It's a release of the weight of carrying anger and resentment that would only harm me in the long run. But trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions over time. And it's something Jennifer is still in the process of earning back. Maybe she will completely one day, maybe not. But what matters is that we now have an honest foundation upon which to build, rather than a foundation of lies and manipulation that would inevitably collapse again. Another crucial lesson was about the importance of documentation and preparation when you're dealing with someone who can be manipulative or dishonest. The security cameras, the meticulous records, the professional legal assistance, all of that was absolutely critical to my ability to defend myself effectively. Without those tools, it would have been my word against hers. And given the historical favoritism my mom showed Jennifer, I would have been likely seen as the unreasonable one. But with concrete, irrefutable evidence, there was no room for alternative narratives or manipulation of the truth. It was a powerful validation that served me not just legally, but also emotionally, confirming that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't exaggerating, and that I had every right to feel violated and betrayed by what had happened. I also learned about the complex nature of family dynamics and how patterns established in childhood can persist into adulthood if not consciously confronted and changed. My mom's tendency to protect Jennifer, my own tendency to accept a secondary role and not make waves, Jennifer's ability to play the victim and manipulate situations to her favor, all of that were deeply ingrained patterns that were only finally broken when I refused to continue participating in them. It was liberating to realize that I had the ability to change my own behavior and establish new patterns, even as that meant temporarily breaking away from family, even if that made me seem like the bad guy to those who didn't understand the full story. And perhaps the most profound lesson of all was about self-worth and self-respect.
For so long, I had measured my value through the lens of how I served others, how useful I was, how little trouble I caused. But this situation forced me to confront the fundamental question: what do I really value in myself, regardless of how others see me? And the answer, which